orderly exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Let's get started with our business of shaping policy today by looking at, we're going to start our economic update from China, looking at industrial revolution in that country and impact on the global economy. And now that France has warned that the industrial growth in China is strengthening the entire global economy. How has it got to this level, and what will be the impact of these on the global economy? What is the level of the relationship between China and France, and how will this impact Africa? We have an in-house analyst who is here with us to give us more insight as regards this development. We're being joined by Sam Orovwuje. Glad you have joined us this morning.
Good morning, Femi. A pleasure to be here.
Good morning.
And good morning, Blessing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. In the global arena, when it comes to power play, you can't rule out economic dominance. If you look at the global economy, the GDP per capita, you have the United States dominating that scene, followed by China and then Germany. But here you have a warning coming from France that the industrial growth in China is going to threaten the entire global economy. How do you react to this kind of news, and what do you think is playing out between these two countries?
Thank you, Femi. I think there's a global tension, particularly from the West, against China dominance in the global economy. So it's not surprising that at the event that took place in Italy just a little while ago, the French finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, accused China of threatening the global economy, particularly from the perspective of the view that China is bringing a lot of products into the market. Therefore, the EU, with Australia and the United States of America, they're trying to form an alliance in a way that they can block China development. I think it's more of a global tension, particularly from the overbearing dominance in terms of manufacturing from China. Whether the goods are cheaper is a different ball game. Whether the goods are of standard and good quality is a different conversation. But then that tension is that the productive capacity of China is outweighing some of those manufacturing in European Union in particular, than America. So this tension will continue to be at the global place.
All right. This is not the first time that such concern will be raised. The U.S. some time ago raised this concern, and now it's France. And it seems to be a concern too for the rest of Europe. Is it actually a problem? Or should it be a problem what China is doing? The large-scale production of inexpensive goods in the way France described them. Shouldn't other countries ensure that they also can do large-scale production? Why making it like a crime that China is committing?
You can look at it from the point of view of international conspiracy and international politics. China has become a global leader in trade, and the West, particularly the US, are not really comfortable. So they've come into the marketplace always trying to mount that the products from China are cheaper and to a very large extent are substandard. In my personal opinion, I don't think so. I just think that the place of commerce has been reconfigured by the kind of economic model that the Chinese uses to bring product into the marketplace. So I think the West in particular are uncomfortable with the mass production and the cheap product that China brings into the marketplace. I think it's just more of conspiracy in my own personal view.
I would like to quote the finance minister here, that is the French finance minister, what he said precisely as regards this development. He said, we have an issue with the economic model in which China is producing more and more cheaper industrial devices, because it could be a threat not only for the European Union, not only for the US, but for the global world economy. Now, it's talking about producing more and more cheaper industrial products. Now, every country has what we call comparative advantage, and you maximize that to make gains for your economy. Now that China is taking advantage of what it has, even though it's cheaper than what is provided in other parts of the continent, what would you say will be the impact for China and then on the global economy if this persists?
I think when the European Union is saying that the production of cheaper commodity from China will threaten the global economy, I think it's more of a perspective that is shaped by the dominance of China. So like I said earlier, I think is a politics of it. So if you look at it from the perspective of global competitiveness, the West should equally look inward on how they can make the production of goods to be cheaper. So I don't really think, in my own personal view, that you should worry more of the production of cheap goods. They should equally tinker with the economic model like that of China, so that they can produce in a way that their goods can come cheaper into the marketplace. I think it's just more of international conspiracy against China, and those are my personal views.
So now that the finance minister of France is calling for more communication and collaboration among the G7 nations, what does that suggest?
I think what he is trying to say is, in line with America, they want to find a way to put stiffer tariff measures in place that will forestall the production of goods that come from China into other part of the global economy. And I think it is to a very large extent political. And I don't see to what extent they can pull that conspiracy through for a long time to come, because the economic model of China is more sustainable. They have a cheaper labor to produce things. And I don't see why the West should be crying that the goods that they bring into the market are far cheaper than what they produce in the European Union.
Will it be necessary to probe into why China is also interested in deploying this economic model, in producing cheaper and cheaper products? You are aware that some of the chips being used for electric vehicles and even some of the solar panels have been exported from China. So why putting up this narrative? What is the motive for China?
No, China, you just talked about the concept of comparative advantage. You talked about factor endowment in terms of competitiveness. So if they have factor endowment that will make them produce cheaper, then when the cost of production is cheaper, then they come into the market at a cheaper rate. But the West is not really comfortable with the capacity and the capability of China to produce massively and begin to put those things into the market that makes their product not competitive in the global economy. And I think that's why that conspiracy is there in the global stage. But I think the mix of international politics will continue to dominate the way the big countries of this world will play. So the finance ministers of the G7 are provokingly worrisome about the growing influence of China in global trade. And I think, in my view, nothing more than the international politics. But how they can use tariffs to play in terms of protecting the market remain to be seen in the nearest future.
China's production model, doesn't it have any benefit for French consumers, like goods that come in at lower price, increasing their purchasing power?
Of course it is. But when somebody is producing at a cheaper production rate, then when you cannot compete with that kind of model, then what do? You try to bring about political sentiments in terms of whether the products are of high quality, whether they are cheaper. Therefore, I think the Chinese economic model, by and large, is better. So most of those European countries should look inward and see how they can compete and produce goods as cheap as those products from China.
Now, if you look at the GDP to the global economy, GDP per capita, China has about 18.9%. And I'm wondering why the whole world is so concerned about China. What do you think is playing out the concerns about China as regards its influence, economic influence, and production capacity?
Simply put, is international conspiracy. China has become a very global dominant player in terms of trade, even in terms of international relation with their foreign policy objective of what we call the Road and Belt Initiative that has benefited most African countries. And I think the West is not really comfortable with the dominance. Even if you look at the figure in terms of trade balance between China and Africa, it has overtaken US and the European Union in the last 10 years. And I think they are not comfortable with that kind of trade balance between Africa in particular. So they will be worried and they find a way of trying to pull China down with all kinds of negative connotation that does not represent even some of those production that come from China.
In pulling China down, is that a possibility, given the rate at which China is going, increasing its economic power and even political influence?
I don't think so.
Globe?
That conspiracy will be there for a long while, even where they put some high level of protectionism in terms of high tariff for China-made products. I think it's not going to be sustainable for over a long time. But maybe by and large, after some time, they will find a way to see how they can be competitive with the way China economic model is changing the global landscape in terms of manufacturing.
Now, making this kind of statement, the first thing that came to my mind was that what's the relationship between China and France? Will this kind of statement not threaten the relationship between China and France? And I realized that even France import more goods and services from China. In fact, billions of dollars, as at the last figure that was released in 2023. So with this kind of statement, will it not affect the bilateral relationship between China and France?
I don't think so. Some of these statements are made in summit to a very large extent beyond the summit declaration. When you look at their real impact in terms of bilateral relationship or foreign relation, no much impact is made. And there's a good relationship between France and China in terms of trade relation. So I don't see how that will affect their relationship in the immediate. But then, when those ministers gathered in Italy, they had no option to tell their government that China's cheap products will continue to threaten the global economy to the extent to which tariff measures can shape those conversations remain to be seen.
So let's assume that Europe is able to rally around themselves and come up with some tariff to reduce the influx of Chinese goods into Europe. But for other parts of the global economy, which they are putting forward as part of the argument that China's production model threatens global economy, is it really correct? Because some countries, particularly African countries that are import dependent, get many of those products from China.
No, that's the point we've been talking about. The point is just the tension in terms of global trade. But then Australia, United States of America, and the European Union is trying to see how they can put some tariff measure to protect their industry. But then for us in Africa, I think our relationship with China to a very large extent has been positive compared to the colonizing influence of the West, apart from the United States of America. I think China will continue to dominate in terms of trade in Africa. whether they put some protectionism in the European Union. The US is already trying to do that. So Australia and the European Union and US are trying to put some stiff measures to see how they can protect their industry. But to what extent they can do that, like I mentioned earlier, remain to be seen.
All right, it was reported last week that the U.S. President Joe Biden will announce a tariff on goods imported from China. Now, what do you think will be the impact of this on the global tension that is already in existence? And if this is done, how will it impact production of electric vehicles? Because these tariffs are going on these products.
I think the United States of America is not only the market that Chinese products can be traded in. So even if they put a tariff in place, that will just limit the number of Chinese products, particularly the electric vehicles that are going to the United States of America. The other emerging markets where China will dominate. So I don't see that tariff measure being a threat to China. In my view.
But the U.S. market is a crucial one for China. That's the largest.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
This tension has been there for over 20 years, though it's been very subtle. But then, can America really stay in isolation of China in terms of manufacturing? I think it's a different question that we need to discuss maybe at another point.
Let's look at what is giving China this edge, this competitive edge in terms of manufacturing that threatens other countries.
I think labor cost is essentially, then their development in terms of ICT has equally helped them to become dominant in terms of what they do. So I think essentially those factors that we just mentioned, two of them in particular, as helping to strengthen the production capacity of China. And if you look at the number of people that equally they have taken out of unemployment in the last 20 years has been very substantial, and that has impacted in their production and manufacturing processes, which they are able to bring into the market at a cheaper rate.
All right. To also add to the list of what China is doing differently is also the issue of subsidy be given to for industrial revolution or industrial for production. Now, the European Union is also investigating the subsidy regime and the subsidy model in China. What do you think is so peculiar about this subsidy? Subsidy is a general concept, but what is so peculiar about China's subsidy regime or policy?
I think the European Union should concern themselves with their own challenges. Why are they investigating China in the first place? Every country has a model, an economic philosophy that guides the administration. So if China has an economic model in terms of giving subsidies to its manufacturing sector to create a lot of industrial hub, they are able to bring goods to the market at a cheaper rate. I think the European Union should concern themselves on how they can be competitive in the global economy rather than looking at what China is doing. I think they should concern themselves with how they can be competitive, in my view.
Apart from China, in the Asian continent, India is also building its own capacity in terms of production. So there is the Make in India policy, not just for Indians, but also for exports, where different companies are also citing their manufacturing plans or industry in India rather. So looking away from China, if Europe and the US feels like China is the problem today, rather than attack China, shouldn't there be some form of collaboration for cheaper production that will lead to cheaper goods for their markets, collaboration with countries maybe like India?
Precisely so. You cannot really isolate yourself in the global economy. There's even a greater relationship between India and China in terms of manufacturing as well. So I don't think the West can isolate China completely. Even when they look up to India, there are lots of strong presence of Chinese companies in India in terms of manufacturing. And the economic model of Modi in line with that of China, in my view. So to that extent, I think the West should just find a way to see how they can be competitive, put simply.
How would you expect China to react to these concerns being raised globally? Do you see China slowing down or taking consideration of these concerns? Or how do you see it playing out for China?
I don't think they will slow down. This tension has been there, particularly in the last 20 years, where China has become a global player in terms of manufacturing. So, and I think the way China behave in the global marketplace, I don't think they will be bothered. They will do their own kind of subtle diplomacy and begin to see how they can strengthen their production capacity using subsidy to drive their industrial revolution. And they will call it look elsewhere, beyond the West, to market their product. And I think they have a very good foreign policy initiative that drive the process of development in Africa.
The step that the US took when it raised this issue to have a dialogue, a discussion with China over its production model, do you think it's something that France and the rest of Europe should adopt rather than going over to the G7 nations to do an assessment of China's production model?
No, I think it's just a complaint that if the bigger countries allow China to dominate, then in the nearest future, there will be no place for them to equally compete. Like I mentioned earlier, the best thing is to do is to study the Chinese economic model. What are the key benchmarks that the European Union can benchmark with so that they equally can produce at a cheaper rate so that they can compete globally. I think that's the best way to explain that. Collaboration is a game of international relations. So if you're able to collaborate and use diplomacy to resolve some of those tensions, tariff measure and undue protectionism in the West may not be sustainable in the nearest future.
Oh, but let's play this scenario. I hope we're not exaggerating, but let's assume it's an assumption now. Let's play the scenario that China succeeds with its bid to dominate the world economy. What may likely play out? Is there any threat indeed?
Well, it's also few threatening that are saying that there's a threat in the way manufacturing is done from China. But I just think there's always what you call global equilibrium. At a point where the tension gets to a certain level, nations will find a way to use diplomacy, either from people to people or government to government diplomacy, and those tensions will be resolved in a way that it doesn't impact the globe negatively.
But the concerns, is it all about control or the imbalance in the world trade or in the global economy?
Is just the game, international politics of superiority of nations in the global space. Nothing less than that. Is everybody is claiming global relevance and see how their foreign policy can impact on their domestic policy. So if China is doing very well and you are not able to trade competitively in the global marketplace, then there's a likelihood that your domestic policy will not impact your citizens. So I think that's just the international politics that has always been at the world global stage.
Let's look at the implication of that if it becomes a possibility, perhaps after the meeting, communication and collaboration of the G7 nations and then assessing China's production model. They did come up with some tariff measures on Chinese goods. What will be the implication of that on Europe's citizens?
Number one, if you put a protection in place, that means Chinese goods will come in at a very high price to those countries, therefore to impact negatively on the citizens of those countries. Number two, if those tariffs are so high, then China may look for other markets to find a way to trade with. Therefore, that to a very large extent will impact negatively on those countries that have put some high level of protectionism in terms of tariff. That means that those goods are not likely to get into the place, and their citizens may not be able to buy those goods. So it will not be a win-win situation for them in some respect. But like I mentioned earlier, this communication coming from the finance ministers of the G7, they will communicate to their respective governments and see how they can use diplomacy to resolve some of those issues. But if it's outright ban or placing a high tariff measure on some of those goods, in the long run, it will not really benefit them, because if they cannot produce at a rate where citizens can afford those commodities, then it becomes a problem as well.
It seems to me that China is eating back now, reacting now. There's a statement released yesterday where it was said that the tariffs on imported cars will be as high as 25%. What will be the impact of that? Now that, that's in response to the one announced on Friday by the U.S. authority, by the Joe Biden administration. Now China is reacting, saying, okay, on cars imported from the U.S., they will be imposing 25% tariffs, as high as 25%.
Yeah, that's the politics of reciprocity. If you think you're going to protect your own industry, some products that are coming from your own country, they will put a protection mechanism in place. So I think it's not as easy as those who made those statements will look at it. So if you're saying, okay, you're placing tariff on Chinese products coming to your environment, they have a way to equally say, yes, some of your products coming to our own environment will place a tariff, if not even higher. So at the end of the day, when you look at the balance of trade, it will not all go well for both countries. So, and that's why I mentioned earlier that beyond this statement in summit, there are other avenues of negotiation that will balance out at the end of the day. I think nobody grandstands in international politics, because it will not benefit you sometime when you grandstand.
Looking at other economies not as big as the Chinese economy, countries in Europe and even the US economy, just watching this drama play out, what should be the follow-up action as a kind of measure against what could be the fallout of this a Cold War that is kind of building between China and Europe?
No, the Cold War has always been there.
Well, it has been in existence.
Yes, what I'm trying to say, that
US,
tension,
not really,
yeah, will continue to be there. Then, at the end of the day, like I mentioned earlier, countries will find a way to resolve this trade dispute, as it were. So I don't think that tension will create any disorder in the global economy, in my view. So those tensions are there. Find a way to have a kind of equilibrium in terms of trade laws, trade policies, and how nations can trade among themselves. And mind you, there's the World Trade Organization, who is like an arbiter in some of these issues that we're discussing. So it's not a cast in stone kind of policy regime that you just throw some tariff and you try to protect your local industry, and at the end of the day, you can't trade amicably.
Looking at trade policies now, the picture that is being painted sort of by Europe and US is that perhaps China is not adhering to fair trade policies, and it may not even be adhering to environmental laws completely. That's why it's able to overproduce as against what other countries are doing. Now, if after the assessment they're able to find something concrete, is there a chance China could be sanctioned if there's something concrete proving this narrative?
In international politics, there's what we call selective morality and double standard. The America and the European Union that are accusing China of fair trade, are they fair in the way they trade with other nations? That's the question. So, and that's the politics of it. Some countries will always accuse other people that they are not fair. Are those countries that say fair? American playing that big role of the international policeman of the world, are they fair in the way they deal with other countries of the world? And I think those are the issues that we need to sustain the conversation. So it's not just sufficient to always accuse another country of fairness, whereas you are not fair, even in the way you relate with some other country. So I think those are the core issues, in my view.
You know, when we have this kind of conversation, we always localize it to see how we can relate it to what is playing out in Africa and Nigeria. Now, looking at what is playing out in China and the approach to industrialization, we look at the history I started and the lessons. What are the takeaways for Africa and Nigeria, looking at the model being adopted in China and the impact on the global trade? Everybody's talking about China now because they are up to something. What could be the lessons for Africa and by extension Nigeria?
Number one, we need to benchmark the Chinese economic model in terms of industrial revolution. Number two, Chinese relationship with Africa is far different from the relationship that we have with the West. So if you look at that, their foreign policy objective in Africa with the Road and Belt Initiative, where they're trying to bring some of their development models into Africa by replicating those items rather than just giving us aid in terms of development. So those are some of the lessons we can take in terms of they bring their infrastructure development. We should learn those models and see how we can take advantage of those initiatives to enhance our own economic prosperity in Africa. Comparatively, in terms of what the West has done to Africa and what China has done in recent years, I think China development initiative in Africa has been forward-looking, and we'll continue to learn those lessons and see how we can take advantage, particularly if the West is not willing to collaborate with China. I think Africa are ready to collaborate with China to enhance our own development agenda.
The Chinese model is what India is also copying, which is Make in India. At first, it was China. Many countries relocated their factories to China because it was easier and cheaper for them to produce. India is doing the same. And Africa would want to do the same. But what are some of the issues that Africa needs to get straight to be able to copy effectively that model?
I think the model in terms of that relationship must be based on not taking our primary commodity from Africa. Rather, India and China, that has a good trade relationship with Africa, should find a way to bring that kind of industrial revolution to Africa by citing some manufacturing plants in Africa to take advantage of our primary product. I think that should be the greatest lesson that we can take. So in terms of policy framework, African government must find a way to put a policy that sustains the development of manufacturing, creating local industry in Africa, taking advantage of India and Chinese initiative to see how they can put more plants in Africa.
Now, the Chinese is like, or China is just like a manufacturing hub for most African nations, especially Nigeria. Now, if this is the reality, At a point, there was this conversation about currency swap between Nigeria and China. Do you think that should be revisited to be able to strengthen the bilateral relationship or the trade facilitation that should take place between Nigeria and China?
There's a greater window in terms of the currency initiative. When you look at it from the BRICS perspective, they are working very hard to see how they can design another common currency by which they can trade with some African countries that are member of that. But then I think they can revisit that initiative in terms of the currency swap that was initiated during the Buhari administration in terms of enhancing trade facilitation between Nigeria and China. If you look at the volume of trade between the two countries. So a policy framework that will take advantage of manufacturing by emphasizing that China should bring that revolution into Nigeria in particular by citing those industries. When you talk about lithium, for example, they should come here and put a manufacturing plant back to back close to the location of those items. If you talk about manufacturing of electric cars, they can equally bring those their plants to our environment so that we can do a kind of integration for technology transfer and human capacity development. And these are the core advantage if we can look up to China and India for our development model. I think, in my view, my personal view, I think we're tired with the Western model of development that has not really taken us too far.
Talking about the BRICS, which you mentioned in the course of your submission, if France will be communicating more with the G7 regarding China's production model, should China also be communicating with the BRICS? After all, they're a bloc as well.
Yeah, naturally. I think that's the essence of belonging to an economic bloc, a trade bloc, to enhance your trade relation or bilateral relation with other countries. So why the G7 finance ministers are focusing on the threat from cheap goods from China. China will be focusing rather on see how the dominance of the US dollar in international trade can be reduced to its barest minimum. I think these are the tensions within the global space. And I think to a very large extent is healthy and they will be beneficial to Africa in the long run.
Let's look at circular economy before what the African Development Bank is doing to support Africa's transitioning completely to this. Now, before the conversation about circular economy got to this point, some industries have been able to create a way of operating that model. But it's not yet a widespread thing because we still find that for many industries, many sectors, the level of waste is still very high. What do you think has been the challenge for Africa actually running a circular economy prior to this time?
I think the model they were used to was a linear economy over a period of time. Sometimes change is the most difficult thing to do. So the circular economy focus on using some products or waste products from your manufacturing processes, and you try to recycle some of those processes, waste products, and see you can use them as an alternative to feed back into your production processes. For example, maybe you generate a wastewater. It goes through a process of trying to regenerate that water and use that water for manufacturing again. If you talk about plastic products, you recycle those products in a way that you can use those products into your manufacturing process. So I think the African Development Bank is trying to champion some small, medium, and large-scale enterprise in a way that they can find an ecosystem where they can use some waste products from their manufacturing and find a way either using them to produce other new products which they can put into the market, or using those recycled products for their own manufacturing processes, able to sustain the environment.
All right, let me do a follow-up to the question asked by Blessing. if you look at the concept of circular economy, it became popular in the 80s, 1980s, as it was designed by a Swiss economist. But you realize that years down the line, Africa is not catching up with this concept. How do you assess the level of, adoption of the circular economy in the continent, and what are the contending issues when it comes to the adoption of this model?
The point is that initially, most of those manufacturing plants were designed in a linear production process way. But now the call for sustainable development is re-engineering the process of manufacturing so that you can take advantage of the circular economy, how you can redirect some of your waste products into core product in your processes. But then it's slow in Africa. One, the challenge of funding to recalibrate your manufacturing processes has been a major challenge. The policy framework and the policy ecosystem has equally not been sustainable. And that's why the African Development Bank is trying to put a policy in place to support that initiative so that most companies can take advantage of that initiative in a way that they can generate waste, like they call it, waste to profit, in a way that it does not negatively impact on the environment.
Now let's look at one sector that should benefit more from the circular economy. Let's look at the oil and gas sector. Reducing waste and converting waste to wealth in a way that it does not so much impact the environment. The issue of gas flaring has been on the front burner for a very long time. What can be done to facilitate this move to a circular economy for the oil and gas sector?
I think the Petroleum Industry Act, the PIA, has a regime that talked about circular economy, to the extent to which we're able to use that law in terms of driving gas utilization and stop the flaring of gas is more political than the economics of it. So I think what we need to do is that the National Assembly need to focus more in a way that we can look at some of that framework and how that framework can drive the process of gas utilization. Then the government must, they put a policy in place that they will stop gas flaring by the year 2030 initially, but I don't see that. That's about 6 years to 2030. I don't see anything on the horizon to show that that policy framework is working. So I think the African Development Bank, since it has a new initiative in this direction, to see how they can partner with the Ministry or the Department of Petroleum Resources to drive that process, and the NNPC to see how we can stop gas flaring using the model or the concept of circular economy to drive that process.
All right. According to statistics released by World Economic Forum, circular economy is estimated to provide about $4.5 trillion global opportunity by the year 2030. How do you think Africa and Nigeria can maximize this global opportunity?
The opportunity is there, but you need funding, and you need a policy framework or ecosystem that supports that initiative. And when we started this conversation, we're looking at the challenge of moving from a linear economy to a circular economy. Once you are able to recalibrate your processes and having an understanding that some of the waste generated are actually wealth to the company, if you don't have that economic philosophy that drive that process, it's difficult for us in Nigeria or in Africa to take advantage of that statistic that you just talked about earlier. But then I think in the response to this, that's why the African Development Bank is taking up this initiative of how they can improve on the impact of a circular economy in terms of creating wealth for citizens.
One key aspect of circular economy is recycling. Now, the culture of recycling is not really very prominent in some African countries. Yes, some companies may try. At the bottom of their product or somewhere on the label of their products, you see an instruction for you to recycle, or it is a recyclable material, so you should dispose in a way that enables recycling. Let's look at waste management and recycling as it should be to aid circular economy in Africa.
I think there are policy framework in place, and I think they need more education for citizens to understand the impact of the waste generated on the environment. But what is key is that for those who are in waste management, there are some countries where you have the waste bin properly labeled in a way that it gives you an opportunity to put the waste in a particular bin, that these products to be recycled. So in the collection mechanism and the collection processes become very easy, and there are some incentive in terms of what you get when you're able to dispose those waste appropriately. Therefore, I think what we need in Nigeria is to provide an education that some of these waste can be converted to wealth. Then the incentive that is paid to citizens in terms of your ability to bring those products in the right, to bring them to the right place in terms of disposal, we earn you some incentive. Therefore, people are encouraged to see how these wastes are properly disposed. So that is within the purview of those in the Ministry of Environment to see how they can educate Nigerians that some of these wastes can be converted to wealth.
Now that African Development Bank, AFDB, is taking this initiative, is hyping, the circular economy and the prospect, what will you expect the AFDB to do differently this time around to assist in eliminating the barriers in the transition to circular economy?
Number one is to provide adequate funding for those companies that imbibe the concept of circular economy, so that they can do a recycling of those products. They equally help them to develop access to market in terms of how those recycled products can get into the marketplace beyond the one those companies can use for themselves to enhance their production. Two, more education. Then they need to encourage civil society organization in terms of advocacy to see how particularly small and medium enterprise can take advantage of that initiative in terms of building a sustainable circular economy to address the issues of waste management in Nigeria.
All right. So what the AFDB is doing is actually to partner and provide and support initiatives that will help Africa transition. So they have the Circular Economy Facility, African Circular Economy Facility, ACEF, and they also have the African Circular Economy Alliance, which supports African nations in transitioning. So they offer tailored financial solutions. They also offer sector-specific support and collaborations of stakeholders. Let's look at sector-specific support. In the agricultural sector, what kind of support would that sector need to enable circular economy?
It's just to have an adequate credit facility that will support the production process to minimize waste. For example, if you're talking about cassava, you're going to convert some of those into ethanol. The peels are equally converted into some other elements that can be used for other sectors. So the facility that is being initiated by the African Development Bank will support the development in that sector so that they can take advantage of the circular economy initiative so that they minimize waste in terms of the agricultural value chain in that industry.
How can the level of awareness about circular economy be improved? You observe generally in Africa, the concept of circular economy, even though it's inexistent, but it's largely not embraced the way it ought to be due to poor awareness or public awareness on the part of the citizens. How many people understand this concept? When you look at the 5 arrow of circular economy, reuse, recycling, and the rest of that, what should be done to ensure that the level of literacy expected as regards the concept and the adoption of circular economy will be generally embraced?
I think this African Development Bank initiative is welcoming. If you look at the various elements in terms of this initiative, there are over 5 or 6 initiatives. And once the African Development Bank is able to address those needs, and I think they have an advocacy component of that initiative that will bring about education of the importance of a circular economy, how you recycle, how you reuse products from the process of manufacturing, whether small, medium, or large-scale enterprise. So the Ministry of Environment in particular, that have some funding from international agency, to scale up the process of education in that regard. Civil society, on the other hand, who work within that space, should equally scale up their advocacy so that the knowledge gap in terms of what happened in that sector can scale up so that it can impact citizens positively.
Now, part of recycling involves redesign and reuse. For products that are not made or manufactured in Africa, does Africa have the capacity then to redesign or repurpose those materials? What is the role of the manufacturing companies in ensuring a circular economy at the end of the day for countries where they ship their products to?
I think recently, I think the European Union has an initiative to support manufacturing companies in Africa so that they are able to reuse and recycle some products. So those initiatives, like we mentioned earlier, will help to improve on how key manufacturing companies that are not situated in Africa, because they have a fund in their home country, that fund should find a way to get into other countries where they do their manufacturing and take advantage of how they can use a circular economic concept or model to steady their manufacturing processes so that we can recycle some of their waste and reuse some of those products. So it will be a win-win situation where the parent company elsewhere is able to use the funding they get from their home country to support their branch network across the world.
Now, in other climes, you hear of circular cities like Germany, even in South Africa, you hear Johannesburg is an example of what you call a circular city. But largely in Africa, especially in Nigeria, or most importantly in Nigeria, how do we adopt that model of having circular cities where cities are designed specifically to be able to accommodate the concept of circular economy? For Nigeria, what will be the starting point? How should we achieve this in terms of policy and the framework towards having circular cities?
I think it's to provide the law that supports a circular city. Number 2, the policy framework, once the law has been made, must find a way to provide some incentive for those who want to go into the CC to invest resources. So if you create those kind of circular cities, you must provide some tax incentive so that people can have what we call tax holiday, so that they can invest in those circular cities. They take advantage of that concept in those cities. So, like you mentioned, the policy has to be there, the enabling law has to be there. Then you must provide an ecosystem that supports investment for those who want to going into those cities first and foremost.
What kind of training, should be the approach towards training for refurbishment and recycling if the circular economy is to be effective in Nigeria and Africa?
Those who are into industrial sector development must factor in capacity development in terms of the technical skills set that you need to drive that process. So, number one, you must design or you must create technical schools, not necessarily new ones that are tied to industry based on research and development. So you're able to develop those skill sets that will help to drive down or scale up the process in terms of the skill set you use for recycling, how you market, reuse products that come from those circular economies. So it's important that the framework in terms of technical education is critical to driving the knowledge process and the production process in those sectors.
Let's look at the impact of circular economy on the Sustainable Development Goal, the SDG. How much of influence will the adoption of circular economy bring to achieving the SDG goals by the year 2030?
I think like the SDGs, they are very ambitious goal. We're just few years to the timeline. So if you look at all of them, yes. If you look at the targets, the various milestones for those targets,
especially
leave much to be desired from goal number one to the last goal. So, but then they are desirable in the extent that those goals put you on the pathway to development, so that you're able to see that you can use them in a way that can create value. But then the impact of circular economy is not felt here, and I think that's why the African Development Bank is taking that initiative to see how it can impact on African countries. In that regard, therefore, if we're able to get those funding, the facilities that has been initiated in terms of credit for development from the African Development Bank, then we might be in the way of taking advantage of circular economy in Africa.
Beyond what the AFDB wants to do and is currently doing, what should also be a complementing effort from African leaders to ensure that a circular economy is achieved in the education sector, in research?
I think, number one, the African country must take advantage of the African Development Bank, which in itself has a project 2063. And some of these projects are already in the works in terms of the goals of the African Development Bank. So African country must take advantage of the various facilities that support circular economy by taking credit to develop that economy. The Ministry of Environment has some international funding for circular economy. They must take advantage of those facilities so that they can replicate them back at home and sustain ease of doing business within those ecosystems by supporting credit, by putting regulatory framework that support the development of circular economy. If we're able to take a holistic approach using those elements that we just discussed a little while ago, then we'll be on the path of progress and development in terms of circular economy.
Now, let's look at the infrastructural gap that may limit the adoption of circular economy in Africa. What would you expect AFDB to do in this regard?
The African Development Bank already have infrastructure development loan. They have various projects that are dedicated to development. So the main point here is that leaders must lend themselves to taking advantage of those projects by sustaining good governance, and where those monies that have been earmarked for development, they should not find their ways into the cookie jar in a way that it doesn't impact negatively on the countries where those money are drawn down for development. So if we're able to provide the right leadership, good governance, corruption is minimized to its barest minimum, then we're able to take advantage of the African development projects for the economic prosperity of all Africans.
What sort of stakeholder collaboration will help to foster this?
I think even within the framework of the African Development Bank, they have a civil society group. They have the circular economy group that they just created recently with core facility to drive that process. So a stakeholder engagement strategy will help to sustain collaboration in that sector. And when people are able to collaborate effectively, then that sector can be sustained over a period of time. So collaboration is a key to driving that process.
Thank you very much, Sam Orovwuje, Director, Center for Public Policy, for doing early exchange with us, because you've been here from the start of the show till now.
My pleasure.
Yeah, this is where we wrap it up today. Many thanks for being a part of it by watching. You can watch again tomorrow. Tomorrow is the 29th, or will be the 29th of May, 2024. And it's going to be the 1-year anniversary of the inauguration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu as Nigeria's president. We're looking at the road so far over the last 1 year. Do not miss that show for anything. I'm Blessing Ages. Stay with Sick News the rest of your day.
All right, and from me to you, let's cultivate the habit of managing our resources. You know, the habit of wasting resources is not going to take us to where we ought to be, especially with a target set for the Sustainable Development Goal by the year 2030. Let's see what we can do in our own corner to ensure that we maximize our resources. And don't forget, this conversation continues on our social media platform. And if you need to do a catch-up of this program, you go on our YouTube page to get a review of what we've talked about. I am Femi Ayodele. Early Extinct returns tomorrow, and I see you tomorrow for the inaugural special.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.